For years, we've all heard that buying a home is the best financial decision you can make. But what if I told you that might not be entirely true?
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
So I'm going to walk you through a calculator so simple yet so detailed. It shows you where every single dollar goes, from mortgages, taxes, maintenance, to even investment returns. And by the end of this video, you'll know buying or renting will leave you richer, saving you tens of thousands of dollars every single year.
Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
Huge thanks to Stephen Antonioni for the inspiration behind the sheet. I think he came up with this a few years ago, and I noticed there were some minor tweaks that were required to make this more accurate and holistic. So I decided to just reuse it, make those changes, and give him a shout out.
It's down for an upgrade anyway.
So please show him some love in the comment section and on his channel. Okay, so before we get into the sheet and the numbers, and since real estate can be a sensitive topic, and some of you might be firmly team buy or team rent, and that's okay, but since you're here, I'm going to ask you to keep an open mind.
All right, I'm not gonna let you buy. Then you know what? I'm gonna just have to run right through you. Jackie Chan!
I mean, there's really no point in watching this if you're not open to having an honest, logical discussion about this. I mean, you've probably had one of those arguments where no amount of logic could get through to the other person. Let's not be that person today.
You know what? I'm gonna start dating her even harder.
What's that supposed to mean?
You know what it means.
And so let's get a few things clarified right at the beginning. This sheet isn't about proving whether buying is better than renting or vice versa. It's about understanding whether real estate is a better investment for you compared to other options like the stock market. And to do that, we need to leave emotions at the door and focus on actual trends, not speculation or the feeling that real estate always wins.
It is your heart talking, not your brains.
And later I'll show you why making this an apples to apples comparison is crucial for making an informed decision. Second, we all know that renting can be a liability or that the amount of rent is unrecoverable. But you also need to know that the interest, maintenance, taxes, and other payments that go towards buying a house is also unrecoverable. And this is exactly what this video here is trying to clarify. So you can make better decisions without falling for that, oh, you're wasting your money by renting narrative.
Well, not wasted.
Next, I've seen many people in the comment section talking about how interest payments can be a tax write-off. But you know what? There are plenty of other tax-efficient investment options on the market too, like 401ks, Roth IRAs, RRSPs, and TFSAs. So for this video, we're leaving tax advantages out of the equation to keep things fair. Finally, some of you might ask, what about paying off a chunk of your home loan early? Sure, that's great, but it's no different than investing a lump sum in the stock market. For simplicity, we're sticking to consistent monthly contributions on both sides. These are all important factors to consider, no doubt. I mean, you don't want to end up signing your life away like this legend.
A 30-year mortgage at Michael's age essentially means that he's buying a coffin. If I were buying my coffin, I would get one with thicker walls so you couldn't hear the other dead people.
Okay, so now that we got all of that out of the way and we're keeping an open mind, let's jump into the sheet where I'll show you how to tweak the numbers for your specific situation and uncover something that might just blow your mind.
Boy, you're really gonna flip your lid over this one.
Okay, so this sheet is read-only. And so what you need to do is to first hit File at the top left and click on Make a Copy, and that way you'll be able to duplicate the sheet onto your own Google Drive. Okay, so this sheet is divided into sections. There's a side for home ownership, the one that you see right here at the top, and then at the bottom you have one for renting. And both are packed with important factors you'll need to consider. Okay, so the green cells are where you'll input your data. Everything else is auto-calculated, giving you the big answer you're looking for, whether renting or buying is better for your specific situation. And that is finally calculated in this green cell right here. And please, for the love of all things good, don't edit the non-green cells unless you enjoy breaking things, because the sheet is not going to work after that.
Hey, keep your hands to yourself if you know what's good for you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some examples with the sheet, but this may not be directly applicable to you based on your budget or location, so please experiment and input your own numbers and try it out. Alright, so let's break this down using two examples, one for buying and one for renting. Basically comparing what your situation would be if you were planning to buy versus using the same amount to rent while also investing in the stock market. Okay, let's start with the classic scenario. A family looking to buy a 2-bedroom home in North America. First, let's input the purchase price of the home. Okay, we'll use a price of $700,000, a reasonable figure for a modest family home in North America, like this townhouse for instance. But let's be fair, a decent home nowadays goes for around $1 million easy, but let's not get into that and instead focus on something a little bit more reasonable.
Everything's too damn expensive these days.
For the down payment, let's go with 20%, which in this case would be $140,000, and the sheet calculates the exact down payment amount for you. Now let's set the mortgage rate. We'll use 5%, a rate typical right now, but to be fair, it could be higher than that, but let's say conservative on this one. And then let's set the mortgage term to 30 years. Once you have entered those details, the sheet calculates your monthly mortgage payment as shown here. For our example, it's about $3,000 per month. Next, pick the number of years you plan to stay in this place. If you think this is going to be a house for the rest of your life, then choose 30 years. But since you're buying a basic house for about $700,000, chances are that you'll change or switch houses soon, and so key in the number of years as to when you plan to sell your house. In our case, let's key in 15 years as a fair assumption. Now for the other costs that come with home ownership. There's property tax, maintenance costs, insurance, and a few others too.
More stuff? Yep. How much is there?
There's more.
And each of these unrecoverable costs affects your overall comparison drastically. And this is what is not obviously evident in all these broker websites or something that's conveniently ignored when doing the calculation. I spoke about these unrecoverable costs in my previous video, the 8% rule regarding real estate investments. I'll link that video at the end of this video, which will give you more insights into this. And so even the percentages I'm picking here are an average, which I've justified and explained in detail in that video. For property tax, we'll enter 1.1%. This is the typical average rate for North American properties. If it's different in your location, then update the sheet accordingly. Next, for maintenance, this is usually estimated at 1 to 2% of the home's price annually, where this is the cost of fixing and repairing things in the house. So if you're renting, this would have been the landlord's headache, but since you own the home, you have to allocate some budget to this. Like I mentioned in my previous video, I would allocate 2% because I like to add a buffer to everything, but to keep things really conservative, I'll key in 1% here. And finally, the homeowner's insurance. So this varies, and so I'll choose an average cost of about 0.15%, but you can choose a percentage that is more accurate to your situation. Okay, so next let's talk about utilities. Since homeowners often pay more utilities than renters, you'll need to input an extra monthly utilities amount for owning the home. For instance, I know some of my friends who don't pay for water, and that's taken care by the landlord of the building. But if you own the place, that's a cost you have to account for. Either ways, I'll choose about $100 in this case, but I would recommend choosing something like $200, but again, let's stay conservative. Next comes closing costs. Now, if I haven't already stressed on all those unseen, easily ignored, unrecoverable costs earlier, these two are things that a lot of people don't consider.
Why? Why not?
Basically, these are the closing costs when you buy a place and the closing costs when you sell a place. And these are calculated based on the home price, covering things like inspections, lawyers' fees, and realtor commissions. And these can stack up substantially too. Okay, so normally closing costs when buying averages around 4% of the property. So I'm going to key that in. And I'll key in 6% when selling because that's usually the average. Now, if you're wondering why are we even considering the closing costs upon sale, because this might be your primary residence and you won't be selling it anytime soon. Sure, but it's important to keep this in mind because we're directly comparing the returns of an investment in real estate to an investment in the stock market. And when the market value of the house goes up, people simply deduct the current value of the house from the cost of the house when they bought it. But like we've gone through all these specifics already, clearly that's inaccurate. And since we're on the topic of house appreciation, let's now set the annual appreciation rate for the home's value. In my 8% rule video, I settled on 2.73% as the average rate of real estate appreciation because that's what research showed in North America. I'm going to freaking double it, which to be fair has been the case in some places like Toronto and California. And so I'll use 5.5%, which is a bit above the global average of 3%. Again, just keep in mind that I'm being conservative with all my numbers by a long shot. And you see now that the sheet then estimates what your home would sell for after 15 years, since that's the number of years we choose to stay in this place. And in this case, it shows that the house appreciates to a little more than $1.5 million. Man, that's some good appreciation right there.
God damn, Jimmy. This is some serious gourmet shit.
Anyway, next, we have capital gains tax for the house. Basically, how much tax do we need to pay on the profit or appreciation of the house? For those in Canada, you're in luck because there's no capital gains tax on your primary residence, so you can select no. But if you're in the US or the place with capital gains, input your tax rate here. For now, I'm just going to remove it. In our example, let's go with a no for now. And to keep it a level playing field, we'll see how we can pick a similar option for stocks appreciation later as well. And so you'll see that the total capital gains tax for this property is $0. If you're not planning to stay in this place, i.e. this is not going to be a primary residence, but instead you're planning to rent out part of your home, then this sheet lets you factor in that income as well. Just toggle yes or no here and add the monthly rental income, vacancy rate, additional maintenance, renovations, etc. In our case, let's assume this is going to be a primary residence, and so I'll choose no. So none of these numbers matter after that because you've chosen no. Okay, now let's move on to the renting side of the equation using the same location and time frame. And so I did some research to find out how much the exact same place rents for, and I found that it came up to about $2,900. But let's round that up and key in $3,000 in the monthly rent green cell here. Let's next input the rental insurance. This is usually cheap, around $40 to $50 a month, so let's choose $50 here. Since we're talking about renting over numerous years, let's next enter an annual rent increase rate. I'll use 1.5%, which is the average rate in most areas, especially the ones that are rent controlled. If you want to increase this by a few to reflect your situation, go ahead.
Go ahead, don't be shy.
Okay, so up until now, the only costs we had were towards rent. But clearly there's more money being spent in the buying situation to buy the actual property. And so the remainder of the difference in the amount is what a renter would invest in the stock market. This is super important to consider because the down payment is a big chunk that you're required to cough up for a property which could otherwise appreciate in other mediums like say the stock market, along with monthly payments you're paying towards the house. And so it's imperative that the renter invests the difference because a buyer is automatically building equity in the home, that is, they're slowly getting to own an asset over time. And so the renter needs to choose an asset to invest in, and one of the most reliable mediums is the stock market. So from research we can see that the average rate of return from the stock market has been about 8.63%. But since we're doing this whole conservative thing, let's round down to 8%. This means we're making the assumption that you invest the difference between renting and buying with an 8% annual return. Lastly, let's factor in inflation. Typically, long-term targets are around 2%, but I'll bump this to 3%, accounting for higher current rates. And as for tax implications with the stock market investments, you can choose either yes or no, depending on whether you're investing in a tax-sheltered account like the Roth IRA, 401k, HSA, TFSA, RSP, etc. or not. But since we chose no tax option for capital gains on selling the house, we'll choose yes here, implying that we are in fact investing in a tax-sheltered account. So this way, we're not accounting for tax in both cases, level playing field. Alright, so now the calculator has crunched all the numbers for us. I'll come back to this section in a bit, but let's jump over to the right side of the sheet where you can see a comparison of costs, appreciation, net worth, and net profit. And what does it say here? Whoa, renting is a better option?
Surprise, surprise, they're green.
Damn, that's intriguing, especially considering I've been so conservative with my numbers. In this example, even after 15 years when the house you're buying has appreciated to more than 1.5 million, renting and investing the difference would leave you with more wealth than buying.
What? How?
That's insane. Why is that? Because while rent can seem like throwing your money away, there are a lot of those unrecoverable costs we mentioned earlier when it comes to you buying, which is pretty much you throwing money away. So let's dive into this overview a little bit more. The initial payment basically talks about the costs to get started with each. With renting, there are no costs to get started. You don't need any upfront payment as such to get started with renting or investing, so it's $0. On the flip side, for the buyer, they have to pay the closing costs, which is a substantial amount. In this case, $28,000. Next, you can see the unrecoverable costs in both cases. With renting, it's the monthly rent that adds up to about $600,000 over 15 years, and with buying, it's about $615,000, which is basically the interests, property taxes, maintenance, etc. What's also funny here is that we're only at 15 years and we can see that the unrecoverable costs add up to $615,000, which is almost the initial cost of the house, which is insane.
Hard to believe, right?
Which means that by now you ended up paying almost double the cost of the house to own it. This is something that is very obviously ignored by most people. Next, we have investment gains, which is basically how much have the investments appreciated over the last 15 years. With renting, the stock investments have amounted to $797,000. And with selling the house after 15 years, you get back $768,000. No tax deductions in both cases, so we'll move on. Now there are two important numbers I want you to focus on here. One is the net worth, which is basically the total amount you have invested or own as an asset. So in the renting case, it just means that you have stocks worth $937,000, and with the house, it means that you own equity in your house that adds up to about $769,000. You can see the breakdown here for these amounts in the previous column, where you can see renters' investment gains here. These are all the different amounts that we pay towards buying a house, but instead invested in the stock market. And the home ownership gain or overall asset, which is basically the difference between the appreciated value of the house and the original cost of the house along with the closing cost of sale. Now let's move on to the second number we need to focus on, which is the net profit. That is the amount I'd get if I were to deduct the unrecoverable costs I mentioned earlier from our net worth. Basically, the unrecoverable amount we spend to rent or buy, that against our investment gain, so that we know how much is the gross or net profit. And this is where you can see that you end up with a profit of about $196,000 if you rent and $125,000 if you buy and sell the house within 15 years. And so this way you get a fair apples to apples comparison between the two scenarios. And you can see how even after we kept things super conservative, basically favoring the buying side, renting still yields a bigger profit. Okay, so let's try another example where we decide to buy a $1 million house, which might be a far more accurate ideal dream home here in Canada. You can see now that the difference between renting and buying is even more obvious. I mean, there's like a $350,000 difference. Now I know for a fact that there's some folks there who are wondering whether the sheet is rigged or whether there would never be an instance where buying is a better option.
Okay, calm down.
Okay, so that's definitely not true. Let's play around with some numbers here to illustrate this. Let's say the real estate market does better and appreciation jumps to 7% annually. With a 7% appreciation, the homeowner actually comes out ahead with their home's value skyrocketing close to $2 million after 15 years. So as you can see, changing this one assumption like appreciation can totally change the outcome. But again, this is highly unlikely, or should I say, hoping for this level of appreciation is not a good strategy at all.
Is that so?
Another instance could be buying a house that's worth $600,000. So let's revert the percentage to 5.5% again and update the initial cost of the house to $600,000. Now you can once again see that buying is the better option, but not by a long shot. And that's exactly why using this calculator is so helpful. It lets you test different what ifs so you can see the impact of various market scenarios and adjust according to your unique situation. But as you can see with what I walked you through earlier, especially considering how conservative I've been, renting yields the more profitable and favorable outcome in most cases. The reason why this is true is because the more you borrow from the bank, the more is the interest that the banks charge, which are all unrecoverable. And fundamentally, the stock market is a far more fruitful and reliable source of investment where you can expect to make some serious gains even compared to real estate. So it's a no-brainer. And I haven't even taken into account how much time, effort and headache goes into owning and maintaining a home, which is not the case with renting and investing in the stock market. But of course, since we're talking only about numbers here, let's ignore that piece. The more you start keying in practical amounts in the sheet, the more you'll see for yourself how true it is what I'm implying. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comment section below. I mean, did the sheet make sense or not? Anything, just let me know down in the comment section. Okay, so few final key takeaways here. All in all, remember that you need to be realistic with your assumptions. You need to understand that unrecoverable costs exist in most scenarios and you need to weigh them out properly. If you're renting, then you need to invest the difference, or you need to invest in some medium so that your money appreciates. Your personal goals matter, so if you've always wanted to buy a home, then you need to work towards that. And again, like, some numbers may not make sense to you, but that's okay, because the heart wants what the heart wants. YOLO! And finally, it's important to understand the cost of borrowing. So the intent with this video wasn't to say that you should never buy a house or that you should always rent. The idea is to treat this as a smart investment by picking the right time and situation to buy a house so that you can comfortably handle the payments.
It is about priorities.
I see so many people, a bunch of my friends too, who have bought a house and are now only paying for their house with nothing left over to diversify their investments. I mean, that is a shitty situation to be in. The way I would kind of phrase this whole thinking is to first leverage renting to make you more money using other smarter investments, and then when you have enough liquidity to rely on, flip the switch and buy a place to help you make more money in the process.
If this works out, I could make more money than when I had that rat farm in the basement. Armando, do you have the rent? It's been 2 months, Armando. You're putting me in a real awkward position here.
And if you do this right, then you end up doing what most of these real estate moguls did: start buying more properties, building more equity, and then getting really rich in the process. And this is what I've learned from studying numerous rich personalities too, and I plan to do the same thing as well. Just remember, you need to be home rich, sure, but more importantly, you need to be asset rich and also cash rich. That's something that most people forget, and that's the only way you can live a comfortable, happy and rich life. Whether you're renting or buying, it's essential to understand the numbers. And so I'm hoping that this sheet or calculator helps you do just that.
But numbers don't lie, Penny.
But if I were to be really honest, just calculating the numbers isn't enough. Because like I mentioned earlier, there are numerous personal goals, aspirations, and complex psychology behind why people want to buy a house. I completely get that. And so to fully understand this and make a smart decision to save you tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, check out this video where I break down why home ownership is such a big deal for most people and how we got here. And also this playlist where I talk about the valuable 8% rule regarding real estate investments, as well as all the important but ignored psychological aspects when buying a home. Thanks for watching and happy calculating.
Take a guess how I live. Bet every time you be wrong, you couldn't walk a mile on these kicks. You don't even know the path where I've been.